This is Global Tel Link. You have a prepaid call from an inmate at the Centinela State Prison, Centinela, California. This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded. You have a prepaid call. You will not be charged for this call. To accept this call, say or dial 5 now. Thank you for using Global Tel Link.
So you left off at your buddy saw the coat hanger movie.
Yeah, he was looking through the window and he seen a hanger moving inside a closet. So we walked right around the corner right there. There's like a little gate. You had to go into that gate to like a courtyard to get to the front door. And I walked up to the front door and I tried the handle and the door was open. It was unlocked, which is makes sense, being as how he lived on 20 acres of property, and with the locked front gate. So I'm assuming anybody living like that would leave the front door open, assuming that they were safe, So I walked in, and I as soon as I walked in, I cut straight to the left to the room where we seen the hanger moving, and it was me and my co-defendant who was actually who actually was involved, the one that testified against me, who was actually involved in this crime. And the other one just stayed right there at the door, the one that didn't have nothing to do with it. We were just like, just wait right here. And so I walked in because, mind you, originally it was supposed to look like a drug deal gone bad. So I walked in there, and as soon as I walk in the room, there's a guy coming out of the bathroom closet area, with a big brown leather jacket. He's put it on, and looked like he was obviously getting ready to leave. And of course, I started I was sticking to the script that they had given me. Like started yelling about the money and the drugs and this and that. Like, where's my money at? Woo. And he's basically like, man, you could see the terror and the fear in his eyes because he's he's living his life, and just to look up and see two gang members in his house, and so pointing a gun at him, and he's kind of like,
this call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Shocked, confused, terrified. And so I basically told him, like, to get down on it, get down on the ground. Initially, my intention wasn't to shoot him. My intention was I had zip ties. I was gonna zip tie him, and as heinous as it might sound, I was actually gonna zip tie him around his neck, and just like leave him there. But when I put him down on the ground, my co-defendant was supposed to taser him, like to incapacitate him. And because he had a big old brown leather jacket on, my co-defendant was trying to taser him, and he, they said we were kids, we were both scared, but nowhere near as scared as probably this man was to see these, two idiots in his house, waving guns around and telling him to get on the floor, So he ended up he gets down, he listens, he gets down, and I'm telling my co-defendant to do what you're supposed to do, and he's trying to taser him, but he's so scared that he's hitting him in the jacket, and he's not hitting him like in the neck or somewhere where he can actually incapacitate him, and you can tell that the taser gun, if anything, it just terrifies the man even more, and so he ends up like kind of looking back at us like, like what's going on here, and I'll never forget the fear that he had in his face. I spent a lot of years trying to forget that terror that I seen in his eyes and that fear that I seen in his face, and I spent a lot, did a lot of drugs and a lot of crazy things along the way trying to forget, that fear that I seen in his eyes. And it wasn't up until these last few years that I was able to truly understand what that was, and so that began to develop some sort of empathy and remorse and understanding for the magnitude of the choices that I made. That I was able to truly understand what that fear was, and it was being in situations like when I got stabbed here on the other yard, and being in situations where, I've been jumped and I've been through things that I think back and I was able to connect with him at that moment. Now, looking back at times that I've been terrified with for my life, not knowing what was going to happen, not knowing if I was going to die, not knowing, like here in prison when I got stabbed, like I seen the way we were butchering people, so I know how bad it could have been, and not knowing exactly what was going to happen when I brought these dudes in my cell, not knowing, and the fear that I had in my heart, at that time, I just try to associate that and equate that with whatever this innocent man must have been feeling, when he looked back at me and I seen that terror in his eyes. And so he looked back at me and I told him, don't look at me again or I'm going to shoot you, and so when we're fighting over the taser gun, he goes to try to get up. I guess, survival basically kicked in, and he, said, you know what, man, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die fighting, And so when he went to go get up off the floor, he put his hand on the bed, and as soon as he put his hand on the bed and started to get up a little bit, I fired the first shot, into the back of his neck. And it kind of like traveled down, through his neck, to his chest. And then it was, like we jumped back because he still jumped up. It was crazy. Like instead of hitting the floor, like he like still jumped up, and he turned around like digging through the curtains. And so I took a step back and I fired 4 more times, and I hit him in the back with all 4 of them, and he fell through the window and ended up dying right there on his, right outside the window of the sliding glass door of his house. And so me and my co-defendants turned around and took off running back to my truck, and drove to somebody's house right there in Indio, and basically I gave them the clothes because I had asked my co-defendants to take their clothes off and put some sweats on before we went, and so I gave them their clothes back,
And then shortly after that, you ended up in CYA, the California Youth Authority.
Yeah, yep. I ended up going on a high-speed chase, and ended up going to the California Youth Authority.
So, I guess we'll go back to court. You got resentenced, and then you ended up getting sent back to prison. Was that the time when the sheriff told you that he wanted to get you out of there as soon as possible, or was that the first time around that he told you that?
Yeah, that was the first time. That was the first time around. Oh wait, hold on, let me see. Yeah, that was the first time when the captain of my jail at the time, he was actually one of the homicide investigators for my case, and he that was the first time.
And
the second time.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go for it.
No, I was going to say that the second time I went back down there, I stayed down there for about 5 years. Again, I ran amok in the county for a minute. So when it was time for me to actually go, they had actually had me isolated for like 2.5 years because a lot of stuff was going on in the county jail. They figured if they could isolate me, they could slow down my gang activity and my communication with other people. But of course, it never really does, So I think it was November. Yeah, it was November of 2014. I stayed down there from 2009 till 2014.
And was that
and
something?
I came back up.
Was that common for somebody to stay in county jail that long?
It varies. In Riverside County, things are so asshole backwards right there. There was quite a few people that I seen in my county. Like I said, the first time I was there 6.5 years, and the second time I was there for 5 years. And over there it is kind of common. Like they average about 4 or 5 years, something like that. But yeah, going back, it was just because I was pro per. You know what I mean? So at the end of the day, they really can't rush you along, So it was always one obstacle after another. And given the fact that the gang is called GIU in Riverside County, and LA County is called OCS, I think, OCS. And so it's basically like classification gang unit, So when I got back to Riverside County, they had a thing called GIU. Before it was just called classification. So because they were so set on trying to obstruct my gang activity, in the process they were obstructing my right to the law library, my right to represent myself in pro per. So it basically just turned into like a tug of war between me and the Riverside County sheriffs, trying to get access to the law library, trying to get all of my court orders met, stuff like that. And what's crazy is in the end, the sheriff ended up just getting bit by their own dog, because where in the beginning my judge was in favor of the sheriff, and basically just, uh, uh, everything they had to say, he was listening to him. But in the end, he was like, you know what, man, all you guys listen up. He's done nothing but come in here and be respectful in my courtroom. He's done nothing but be professional about whatever he's doing. So at the end of the day, I'm starting to realize that you guys are the one obstructing this. So he actually even threatened to hold the sheriff in contempt on a couple of occasions, because they were restricting my access to the law library. They were restricting my access to to confidential phone calls and confidential correspondence with witnesses and stuff like that. So it became a whole thing. That's the reason why I stayed down there so long that time, is because the sheriffs were hindering my ability to represent myself, because the sheriff was basically saying that I was utilizing my pro per status to negate the safety and security of the sheriff's department in order to conduct gang activity.
So once you get sentenced, you get shipped off, and had you before you left prison, you had already been validated, right?
Right.
So you get back to prison, and where do you end up going?
I ended up coming back to Tehachapi, because that's where I ended up going out to court from. And so when I get back, they end up they're doing what's called the step down program, where they're actually kicking all the gang members and everybody out. I don't know if you've heard of the Asker settlement, where basically the whole thing behind the hunger strikes and all that stuff, where they were basically, they deemed that segregation, isolation and segregation was cruel and unusual, and basically Asker, who used to be a prison gang member, him and a couple other prison gang members got together, and they put together the hunger strikes, and at the same time facilitated a court case, and they took it to court and ruled that they got the
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
that the due process of the validation was a farce and a sham. They were validating people and with no real due process, and they were keeping people in the shoe for years and years and years for no other reason than their gang association. They posed no real threat, and so when I came back up, anybody that didn't have a write-up in the last year was getting kicked back out, was getting kicked out to the mainline. So it used to, when they established the step-down program, they had phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and phase 5. Phase 5 was the monitor inactive status. So anybody who didn't have a write-up within the last year was eligible to get kicked out automatically to phase 5. And but while that was going on, the Asker settlement was actually reaching, Asker's case was actually reaching the court, and the court actually ruled that they were to kick everybody out. So they did away with the whole phase 5 and all that stuff. So I ended up getting kicked out on that because I had been gone for 5 years. I didn't have a write-up on paper. Even though I was out to court, I didn't have a write-up. So they ended up kicking me out back to the mainline.
And once you get back to the mainline, how do you feel?
Well, but when I had first come back to prison, I had been going on while I was in my county. I had been dealing with another power struggle, a bunch of drama that was going on, and when I came back up to prison, truth be told, I was kind of like in my mind and my heart wasn't in it anymore. I was kind of like, man, this stuff's all bullshit. Like, what are we doing? Not to mention, I don't have life without anymore. I was given 15 to life for the murder and 10-year gun enhancement, so essentially I was given 25 to life. So I was kind of like, I started at the time kind of like, man, what am I doing? So when I got to Tehachapi and they were kicking people out, I was kind of like, man,
You have 60 seconds remaining.
If I'm honest with myself, I was already considering throwing in the towel. I was already kind of like, man, like, my heart wasn't in it anymore. I had already seen too much bullshit, too much shenanigans, and that I realized that when you're standing that close to the fire, nothing that shines is gold. It's all an illusion. The propaganda that we're pumping into people, it was an illusion. Everything's do as I say, not as I do. So when I essentially I elected to go back out to the yard, because I didn't want anybody to feel like I had gotten ran off over the power struggle I had been in. I didn't want anybody to think, oh, these fools broke me, this and that. So I went out to the mainline. I went out to the yard. And you want me to call you back?
Absolutely, yes.
All right.